Good morning. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll get started here in just a second. Give folks a chance to filter into the room here. All right, well, it looks like folks have made it in, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Did I see that we're recording? Yes, we're recording. Okay, great. So thanks for joining us today for our October 28th session of TA Tuesday office hours. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. But before we get to that, we wanted to make a quick announcement that the Illinois Workforce Summit is scheduled for May 7th and 8th, 2026. It will be held at the Embassy Suites in East Peoria. And at this time, the WIOA Professional Development Committee, responsible for organizing the event, they have sent out a save the date / request for proposals. And they are seeking 1 hour long presentations under the theme of Empower, Engage, and Excel. And we'd love for you to consider doing a presentation based on your experiences as a CEJA grantee. And if we can help you pull that together, we'd love to collaborate. So some things to think about. Do you have some best practices you'd like to share with the world or explore an issue of importance to your program that others could learn from or collaborate with you on? Some other topics to explore could include things like what we're going to talk about today. Um, uh, Working with your local navigator, navigators working with local workforce programs. Might also include lessons learned from employer relationships and securing participant transitions. Perhaps something around reentry and the connections in the communities for returning residents, or thoughts and lessons learned from CEJA ecosystem development. Do we have grantees successfully leveraging multiple programs or successfully pulling together multiple parts of the CEJA ecosystem? And then finally, might there be a good collection of employers who we could impanel as part of a discussion around future skills needs, employer relationships, or something like that? As I mentioned, presentations should be about an hour long, which works out to about 45 minutes of presentation plus 15 minutes or so of Q&A. Deadline for proposal submissions is January 16th, so you have plenty of time to think about it. We'll forward you the link after this call so you can register for the summit and get thinking on any possible presentation you might like to give. And as a perk, accepted requests for proposals come with two complimentary admissions to the summit. So I think I will pause right there and see if folks have any questions about the Workforce Summit in May 2026. Feel free to type in the chat or come off mute or raise your hand and come off mute, and we will try to address any questions you might have. Okay, and if not, well, I guess feel free to type questions in the chat as we proceed here, if any come up. But we will move on to the meat of today's presentation. So today we'd like to have a discussion and building off a recent TA Tuesday when we had the Trep School come on to talk about best practices for staff training. We've invited Trep School back again to talk about another best practice. And today we're going to be talking about best practices for working with CEJA workforce training programs. So for navigators working with CEJA workforce training programs. We've been working with Tricia Teague from the ET Navigator Subgrantee Trep School and Trina Taylor from Climate Works Grantee Hire 360 for over a year now. Tricia and her team, under the Vermilion Advantage Navigator Grant, started their grant with no identified hub and no Climate Works training opportunities in Danville. Tricia worked with Trina and Hire 360 to open a satellite training location in Danville, a program to which they are now successfully referring candidates. we've gotten lots of questions about how navigators should work with their local workforce training programs. So we thought inviting Tricia and Trina here today might be a good way to keep this conversation going, to learn about the successes and challenges they've experienced in working together to build the CEJA ecosystem in Danville. So the format for today's session is going to be a moderated discussion between the two. I'll be the moderator, and we've prepared a few questions to explore, and then we'll leave some space at the end of the guided section for your questions as well. So with that said, Tricia and Trina, you ready to dive into the questions?
Ready? Yes, sir.
Awesome. Cool. All right, so to kick things off, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your partnership and kind of how did it start and who does what?
Tricia, you want me to start?
Sure, go ahead, Trina.
Okay. Well, as you stated, Nate, we started the Climate Works program September of 2024 in the Central Region. And I believe that was prior to Tricia and her team starting in Danville. So at the department's request, we began to have those conversations with the navigators in Central Region, trying to determine what a partnership would look like. So our closest partner organization to Danville was East Central Illinois Building Trades in Champaign, which, definitely posed challenges due to its distance. So after several conversations, specifically with Tricia and her team, along with the team at East Central Building Trades, Angela and Kevin, the idea came about of establishing a training location in Danville. So Tricia, I'll let you take it from there because you guys were part of those conversations.
Okay. I think one of the challenges that we had as the navigators was looking to what do we do because we don't have a program. And so obviously honestly some of that was actually encouraged by Nate because Nate had encouraged us to reach out um to learn more about the programs and what the parameters were and whatnot. But the idea of potentially having a program in Danville was one of Nate's suggestions. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Um, and it was we were stuck. Like we were ready to get started. We had a really good plan, but we were stuck because once we recruit, well, what are we going to do with the people? Where are we going to send them? And so it just so happens we also at the Trep School run a co-working space. So we have a training classroom space. So we reached out to Kevin and Justin, one of the instructors, to say, come look at our space and see if this will work for you, so that we could have training. Because what we were also concerned about was people using up the transportation dollars going back and forth to Champaign because that's a 45-minute to an hour drive every single class. And, they're having trainings 3 times a week. So the transportation dollars would be significant. And we're talking about, obviously, as everybody knows, communities that often have barriers. So um, that's kind of how the conversation started. Just let's look at how we can be effective in finding a class, creating a class environment here. And then from that, I think things kind of took off rapidly.
Mhm.
Um, I think because I actually started recruiting staff in September. So it was in January-ish that we started looking at, okay, all of our recruitment activities and what we were going to do and what the plans were, and realized we needed to take a pause to make sure that we had a place to refer people. Once we established a class here, that first class here started in May. So I think it was probably around February or March where we got real um traction in terms of let's get something established. The class started in May. They've already graduated their first class. Their second cohort is actually going on right now, and I think their graduation is maybe next month.
Mhm.
So but we've been really, really effective. Um, so I think I'll leave it at that because it probably answers that question thoroughly.
Awesome. Thanks. And then is there anything else to cover on kind of like between between the Climate Works and Navigator grantees, kind of what's the work share there? Who does what?
I think that that's been an evolving thing,
Mhm.
um, partially because for a few reasons. Number one, we have more resources. Our navigator team is three full-time people. So we have more resources to help with administrative things.
Mhm.
Also because there were some opportunities for being more efficient and more effective that we saw after the first class. So there were things that were happening as relates to participants. You have Hire 360 running ads and recruiting participants long before we came on board. So they're getting potential participants out of Danville. And then we at the Trep School are also recruiting participants out of Danville. It's created a backlog of people to participate in class. So we also realize that people are coming from different directions, and we wanted to make sure that the participants are getting in the order in which they came to us so that we don't have people who just got here a month ago jumping the line ahead of people who had been on our waiting list for like, 4 or 5 months. So one of the things that we do now is that my team here at TREP actually looks at the entire list of potential participants to see them into class. We also do some prep work as it relates to requirements to make sure that participants have started to address those barriers prior to class starting. So then that way we can make sure that they have their driver's licenses or they have their any of the other paperwork that they might need in order to successfully complete the program and then go on to apply for an apprenticeship. So that's something that's change and probably continues to change and evolve as we refine the processes. But we do share a lot of responsibilities as it relates to managing the participants. And another reason for that is the participants don't necessarily know the difference between us and the building trades until they get here, but they know that they've come here for an intake. They know that the people who work here are the people who they've dealt with this entire time. So a lot of times they're contacting my team and asking questions about things, not knowing that there's this handoff. And so we kind of just work together to make sure that, we're providing the wraparound services with the right resources. And, we'll act as the person who speaks to sometimes speaks to the team at Hire 360 and the building trades on their behalf to make sure that they get what they need because they have our phone numbers and they've dealt with our team for a while, especially while they've been on that waiting list.
Awesome. Trina, do you have anything to add to that?
Tricia covered it mostly. I think it originally started out with just the thought it would be outreach and recruitment. But I think, again, as the program started and we really started to collaborate and just kind of understand the roles and the capacity, I should say, that we had to do the various duties. Trish and her team started doing some of the case management or some of the wraparound services. And it does seem seamless, like the participants don't know it's the navigators and then this is the climate work staff because they all work together closely. So it's really been a plus.
Awesome. So there's a lot of kind of looking at what the gaps were and just collectively kind of trying to figure out how to address those in the most kind of seamless way for the participants, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think as we work through the process, we began to understand where the gaps were. Not necessarily knowing that up front, but as we began to roll it out, we were able then to determine, where there were some gaps and how to best fill those.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think maybe a good lesson for other grantees on the call is not necessarily like this is exactly what you should do so much as this partnership explored what the potential gaps were, potential weaknesses were in just in the process, and work together to kind of figure out how the navigators could help kind of fill those gaps. And so, yeah, appreciate that answer. And then I just wanted to kind of drill in a little bit on, you had mentioned kind of the wraparound services. So is uh, Tricia or Trep School, Vermilion Advantage, their role there is connecting folks, I would imagine, to the wraparound services. Is that correct? And then with Climate Works, kind of obviously being the one to pay for those services and kind of administer those, right?
I want to
Yes.
say, yeah,
Well, we provide supportive services leading up to enrollment in class.
yeah.
Awesome.
So if there might be, for example, we know, for example, people need a driver's license. And so if someone needs transportation to the Secretary of State to get their driver's license or financial assistance to pay for their driver's license, we obviously have some supportive services dollars to help with that. It's a limited amount. So there's some things that we can help with prior to their enrollment in class. And one of the things that we have started doing in the last few months is reaching out to the people that are on the wait list to start to get the paperwork and things together prior to enrollment in class so that they have a head start on that process and that those things can be taken care of so they can then be more than likely to have a successful outcome upon completion of class.
Mhm.
That's
And then
awesome.
once they get into class, then that responsibility lives with Climate Works team. And we're obviously, if they contact us, then we're contacting them to say, this person asked for this, and then working through that process with them behind the scenes.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the navigator role in kind of ensuring that they can get to the to class, to some of that pre-enrollment supportive services, and then sort of helping to bridge that transition, kind of bridge that handoff, I guess, to make it more seamless for the participant to go from, the case management of the navigator, bridging over to that case management from ClimateWorks. So that's awesome. Thank you for that. Let's see. Next question I have here. Um, could you talk a little bit about what you would describe as kind of the keys to success of y'all's partnership?
Well, I can start. I think, in my opinion, um, it's that shared commitment to helping individuals. Of course, I know we have to meet our program requirements and metrics, that's essential. But what I found during this partnership, it's just the genuine care for others, which is at the heart of it, and sharing that common goal of just trying to figure out how to best serve those individuals who come to us for assistance.
And I'll add to that, I also think it's a little bit of collective problem solving, an entrepreneurial approach to problem solving, which is always solutions oriented. So, we've there were many things that have come up along the way that we identified as potential problems. And I've always encouraged my team to say, okay, well, we know what the problem is, but what could we do to help make this better? How can how can we come up with a solution that is a win for everybody involved? And at the end of the day, that's what we want. We don't want to have an adversarial relationship because we all want the same thing, which is to make sure that people succeed and to give them an opportunity and a leg up and and being part of this program. So if we can come up with a solution that is a win for the participant, a win for Hire 360, and a win for us, then everybody wins.
And I think in that we've all been open to the solutions, like understanding that there are issues and just open with the solutions and just coming to the table with solutions and taking
Mhm.
the initiative to kind of follow through with them.
That's awesome. So kind of taking a shared approach of here's
Yeah.
what needs to be done in this region, and how can we, each kind of bring our own skills and resources to the table to kind of help address that. And so I think, what I'm hoping folks can take away from this kind of conversation is sort of some of those general practices, right? Like like that, where it's like we may not be able to just to solve, we may not be able to provide templates to solve every specific problem around the state, but I think if we start with kind of that general approach of okay, we're both kind of working, we're both really working on the same project here. We may have different metrics, we may have slightly different geography that we're focusing on, but we're all working towards the same thing. And so, I liked when you gave the example of like the waiting list, and so, you've got folks on a waiting list, and so deploying the navigator to see how you can sort of cut down on some of the administrative work that goes into turning those waiting list folks into actually enrolled folks. So kind of trying to cut down on the time that it takes to make that transition. I think that, identifying what's in the pipeline and how you can work together to address that. I think that's really uh, useful advice. So the next question is specifically for Trina. And Trina, how can navigators help you in the various subregions where you have programming? And if that's different by region, what are the kinds of things that they can help you with? And I have a couple of examples here, but I don't want to make the question too long.
Right. I think the navigators across the subregions, I think it'll vary depending upon our partner organization. Um, I think what's important is to first establish that same type of dialogue we had with Tricia and her team, discussing how and where the program is being administered, identifying opportunities to support one another in delivering the services. And of course, that level of support that will be provided, it's determined by the capacity, right, of each of the navigators as well as our partner organizations. So I think that is what's important, before we kind of define what the roles and responsibilities will be. Again, with us establishing a new site in Danville, it kind of allowed us to just, I guess, create that partnership. Whereas if we're established already, we then need to determine, what's the best fit? Like, how can we conduct referrals, or how can the outreach and recruitment kind of be incorporated with the outreach and recruitment that we're performing already? And if so, like, how do we work that list of individuals who are eligible and ineligible? So it really, truly, it'll look different. I'll use Rockford region for an example, where the Goodwill Industries of Northern Illinois are the navigators, but they're also our partner organization for Climate Works in that area. So, I mean, that's pretty seamless. Like, that's an easy one, but it definitely looks different than our partnership with Tricia and her team.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I wonder if you might be able to mention, you talked about referrals, and kind of the waiting list. What about the other end of that pipeline? Is there any role for the navigator on kind of the employer or placement end of the pipeline in terms of like making connections?
Of course. I think, and that is something that those conversations we're beginning to have, because of course, we're having individuals graduate with different, sets of interests, different sets of skills. So if we could add another resource as far as the navigators are concerned to help us place, that definitely would be a win-win for all of us. So again, what that looks like would first start with the conversation on how we're doing it, how we can do it moving forward, to make it pretty much as seamless as we possibly can for the participants.
So get those conversations going and
Yep,
get the
that's the
communication
key.
going between. Yep. Okay.
That's the key.
Trisha, this one's for you. What advice would you give other navigators who may be struggling to kind of find their place?
Um, I think it's partially looking at the potential problems that exist in the relationship or for participants and figuring out how you can solve those, how the navigators can solve those problems. Um, so yeah, that's kind of been our approach. For example, when we looked at um, the potential for attrition with people on the waiting list or people being frustrated about having to wait, well, that's a problem. We see that as a potential problem, but what can we do while they're waiting? So, well, we know that there's a list of documents that they find out about at the beginning of class. We know what those are before class starts. So let's have them start to do that work now. So it feels like they're doing something that actually moves the ball forward, and they are. Um, so I think it's just a matter of looking at, the potential problems that exist and figuring out where you can help in those because I kind of see both the participants and Hire 360 as our customers. And so we're trying to solve this problem for them as our customers.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, next question is can either or both of you, I guess, speak to kind of your communication strategy when working with the other grantee? We mentioned kind of that, that start that conversation, get the communication going early and often is good. But what does that look like for you all? Is it weekly meetings or check-ins, more or less frequently than that? What does that look like?
Well, we currently do monthly. We have a reoccurring monthly meeting schedule, but we meet as often as it requires. If something's going on or we feel we need to address something immediate, we're jumping on the call and talking about it. So we meet as often as we need to.
Hmm.
Awesome. And is that largely between the two organizations, or is the navigator kind of like involved in larger group discussions? Just kind of curiosity.
It's
Well,
all,
yeah.
uh, it's all three of us. So the monthly meeting is Hire 360, Building Trades, and the Trep School. And then that's where, we talk about plans for the next class. We might talk about scheduling scenarios, um, variety of things. And then there are things that come up between classes. Like there was just an email last night about
Mhm.
somebody needing to get their driver's license, but they have a DUI and it's out of state and all of those things. So there's some of that happens on the fly as needed because a situation, warrants it. But in terms of regular conversation, yeah, we have that monthly check-in meeting to plan and to talk about processes and things. And it's definitely been helpful.
Karina, do you have anything to add on that one?
No, that's pretty much it.
Okay, cool. I have one more question here, and then we'll open it up to see if other folks have some questions here. So one of the things that we've started encouraging the Navigator and Workforce Training Program grantees to do is to form an MOU. And I wonder if you have any advice on that, if you could touch on if that's something y'all have worked on or moving toward. Do you have any advice on how to best move that work forward? Like, how do you know who needs to do what? And yeah, anything you might be able to add on that?
I think when we started it, we had an idea that the relationship would be the navigators doing the outreach portion and the recruitment. But definitely since then, those duties have evolved into more than that. Um, so, I mean, I think when it's just that working together and sort of stepping outside of what our designated roles may be, and just kind of filling in where we need to, like those gaps again that we know may exist or may not exist. Tricia and her team have been more than willing to step in and provide those services where we may not have had the bandwidth to do so. So, it just to me and Trisha, you can add more. It just started out with, the conversation of what was expected. But then again, it kind of evolved into how do we best serve these individuals?
I would concur with that. It definitely started off with, well, okay, these are the things we do, and then we just hand people off. And I think we just both saw that there were holes there
Yeah.
and gaps that needed to be filled. And in places where it made sense for us to fill those gaps, we just raised our hand to say, yeah, we can do that. We can help with this. Um, and understanding that the building trades, you know, they have resource constraints and that, uh they have people who are working full time doing things and then providing training. So, from an administrative perspective, especially from an administrative perspective, it just seemed to make sense that we could step in and fill some of those holes because it makes life easier for everybody and most importantly, the participants.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like really kind of doing what's needed to kind of smooth that handoff, right? Is like kind of smooth that transition into the training and the handoff to the training providers and kind of just filling in those gaps as needed. So I appreciate helping us all kind of think through that together. Yeah, I think that was all the scripted questions I had, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind taking a few questions from some of the other grantees.
Absolutely.
Well,
All right. Well, yeah, if folks have a question, feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. Not everybody all at once. Any questions from our grantees here? What do you want to know about this partnership or how you can maybe get something like this going in your region? Or I guess at this point, any other questions too that may be uh, burning for you as you administer your grant?
I happen to have a burning question.
Okay. Yeah.
Do we know an estimated timeline for when the grantees that were recently awarded will be stood up and, start actually doing things?
Yes, we are hoping for negotiations with those grantees to wrap up here in the next few weeks with establishment. We hope to happen in December, and then kicking off the program delivery in January.
Okay. Obviously, we're waiting on a hub, so
Yes, yep. So we've got hubs coming on board in Danville, Kankakee, and Peoria, and Carbondale. And then we've got some navigators coming on board in Decatur, Champaign, and Kankakee. And then, of course, we've got our returning residents coming as well. And I did get another question here. So kind of related to your work together, kind of defining the roles and expectations. Um, Do, do you have you established yet, or kind of what are your thoughts on sort of establishing those numbers, right? Like how should the navigator work with the training program to define what successful numbers are in terms of recruitment and applicants and things like that?
so I think when we were being required to come up with those numbers, Tricia, we had a conversation,
Mhm.
yeah, about what would that look like? So I think together we kind of agreed upon what would be a realistic number that we both, because I believe some of those metrics are the same.
Yeah.
Um, So we just, I mean, again, we had a conversation about what would be realistic and what it would look like for the program year.
Hmm. I think in the first year and in our program applications, we came up with numbers in a vacuum, not knowing who the other providers were, what their numbers might be, and most importantly, what their capacity was. So we know that af during the first year, our work plan actually changed for us as a navigator, because one, we didn't have any hub. So all the hub numbers had to go away because you can't put people in a place that doesn't exist yet. And then the Climate Works number then also changed based on capacity. So when we started the second year and working on the work plan, it was okay, what's the schedule of classes? What's the capacity per class? And then that number just, calculates out for the entire year. So we can recruit way more people than they have capacity for. But at the end of the day, the number of potential graduates is always going to be limited by the capacity that exists. So unless there are additional resources added, and I'm always, saying yes, we will take more resources. Um, so unless there are additional resources added, we know that there's only going to be a certain number graduated, every quarter.
And just real quick to add to that, I just think being educated on the fact that her team had metrics, like I didn't know what they were, or so just understanding that. And then I think them understanding the whole issue with capacity and just understanding each other and how the program operates also helps in determining what those numbers look like realistically.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's good advice too. Is like, I think one thing I'm noticing out of kind of what you all's experience is, you created the numbers and like you said in that vacuum without knowing what the other program was gonna be, and obviously you were kind of forced into that position, right? Just by the fact that you had to apply without knowing who the workforce training grantee was. And then in the process of kind of reality testing those numbers with the actual workforce training grantee and then right sizing those numbers, it kind of freed up your capacity to kind of plug those gaps that you're able to identify through that collaboration. So whereas you may have anticipated going out strictly to recruit X number of people, once you right size those numbers to higher 360s capacity, you're able to say, okay, well, we're probably going to be recruiting fewer people, but now we've got some time to help plug some of those gaps that we're noticing in that intake process. And
Hmm.
so I think that's something that probably a lot of our grantees could be able to could take away from this is like, hey, once you sort of right size those numbers, what does that free you up to kind of help in some of these other areas where the ecosystem might need some holes to be plugged. And I guess in terms, specifically on those numbers, once you were able to get together and kind of agree on sort of those local region specific numbers, is there or was there a process for, okay, uh, Tricia, your team is going to recruit this number or this percentage of that goal, or is it a kind? Do you see it as kind of a collaborative effort in that regard?
I
I
don't,
feel
oh, go ahead, Trina.
Yeah, I think that it's two parts of that. I mean, yes, we collaborate on the process, but I think because the program has been, up and running for a year now, it's sort of the communication about the program, like folks are knowing and learning about the program, whether it's word of mouth, whether it's ads. So it kind of just took on a life of its own as far as folks, applying and things like that. But at the same time, the two teams working together, I feel like to get some order about all those who come in and request our services.
And one thing that hasn't come up yet in this conversation, because Building trades and Hire 360 were already recruiting or were already providing programming. One of the reasons why we had to do this is because there were capacity issues already in Champaign. There was already a waiting list before we ever got started.
Right.
So anybody that we would have recruited, even if we sent them to Champaign, they would have had to wait 6 months to get into a class because that's how big the waiting list was already. So there was part of this hap part of this happened because out of necessity. Like, what are we going to do with the people that are being recruited out of Vermilion County? Um, and then I think as it relates to, the numbers and the joint numbers between us, um, I don't think we changed any of our recruiting efforts. We just have a really big waiting list now. But we also know that we're going to have a hub. So that could potentially clear a lot of the waiting list once the hub gets stood up and starts offering programming. Um, but I think it does take a certain amount of pressure off because we might not be as aggressive as we had been initially with recruiting because we know that there are, capacity concerns and that we can only have so many people per class.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And I guess I'll give uh, one more one more request for other questions. Anybody else have any questions about all of this? And I think, isn't it the case that with your guys' partnership, the folks who do kind of learn about the program, uh, maybe through word of mouth or some other kind of marketing that maybe isn't specifically led by Trep School or Vermilion Advantage, haven't you sort of come up with a seamless way to sort of route them through the navigator for assessment and application and assessments and those kinds of things? I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, Trish, I mean, I think we just came up with that, what, like about a month or so ago,
I
where,
think so.
yeah, where it was realized we did have individuals who came in through other means. And I think our process now is to send that group of individuals to Trish and her team, and then they kind of prioritize, I don't want to say prioritize, but put them in the order in which they applied and then go through their process of contacting them um, to see if there are other services and to, let them know that there is a wait list.
Cool. And so it's, I think one of the things we've talked about before is like we don't want to bounce people around, but it seems like in y'all's case, they sort of submit their interest to wherever, whatever door that they come through, whatever front door they come through, and then kind of the navigator then picks them up as the next step, right? Is like,
Hmm.
okay, now you've sort of submitted your interest to Hire 360, or you've submitted your interest through Vermilion Advantage / Trep School, and now the next step will be Trisha's team reaching out to you to kind of uh, take the next step in terms of your application and getting in the queue.
Yes. Yes, we'll do the assessments. We'll see what potential barriers that they might have and then try to get those addressed and again let them know about the waiting list and about where they might be on the waiting list. And then one of the other things that we do in preparation for class is contacting everybody on the waiting list to get them signed up into class to make sure that they're going to be there because we also don't want there to we don't want seats to be open and vacant. We want to actually have a full class.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our presentation here. I definitely want to give a huge thanks to Tricia and Trina, and Trep School is our repeat best practices presenter. I think we'll probably give them a little break here, but would love to have other grantees come on and talk about what's working well with your program, or even what's not working well, and how can we work together to kind of figure that out. Another big thanks to our guests today. Thank you for attending as well. And I did put a link to the Workforce Summit request for proposals page where you could submit a request to present at the Workforce Summit in May of 2026. And I will make sure we get an email forwarded out to you folks that has that link in it as well after this meeting. We'll send the recording link as well as the link to that to get registered for the Workforce Summit. So thank you all, and we will see you at the next session.
Thank you, Nate, for the
Thank,
opportunity.
yep, thanks for having us.